Hello, welcome back to Hat Trick. I am Jordan Dyler-Coltman, joined by Elliot Tanti and Braden Dyler-Coltman. We have been off for another week. We're sort of doing this like lazy August where we're doing every other week. It was just like a summer break. We're going to call it. That's what it was. It was planned all along, every other week for August. But don't you worry. We're about to get back into the swing of things because we've got the NHL offseason nearing its end. We have the NBA wrapping up its summer league and all of the festivities that lead towards the beginning of its season. And unlike last season where both of those leagues had to wait till nearly Christmas to get going, they will get started on a regular schedule, so we will have lots to talk about coming into the fall. We are excited for that. Welcome back, boys. How was your week off last week, Elliot?
It was wonderful, but I did miss you, gentlemen. So it's nice to be back here and nice to be talking about sports, no matter how slow August is.
Braden?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm excited to be back talking about all things sports, not just basketball. But I had a good time last week recording our second episode of the Backyard Basketball podcast. You can find on Wednesdays on this network. Quick little plug there, and ready to get back to these conversations.
Yeah, it was a great episode of your show. Both you and Christian have been doing a great job with it, and it's a lot of fun to listen to. So Hat Trick listeners who haven't checked that out, go and find that. It's got its own feed, the Backyard Basketball Podcast. The two of them have a great repartee, and they dig in. It's kind of a more long-form, windy conversation than this show, but it's great. They dig on basketball, and it's a great thing for us because it means Elliot and I don't have to talk too much about basketball, so it's fun. Also, just a little bit more housekeeping before we kick this week's episode of Hat Trick off. The other show that is hosted on this stream is the Pit Stop Podcast. They are coming off their summer break. They have 3 back-to-back races, a little hat trick of races, if you will, to get back into the second half of the season, and the second half of the season keeps getting shorter. They cut the race that was supposed to be run in Japan, unfortunately, so we are seeing more races still come off because COVID is still ravaging many parts of the globe, unfortunately, including Alberta, but we won't dig into that. Let's just remind you that the Pit Stop Podcast will be back this week. We've just shifted the format a little bit after the summer break. It used to be a preview show. We would do it on like Thursdays before race weekend. We're now going to do it on the Tuesdays following races. So it's more of like a recap and then a setup for what's coming next. But Braden and I were just enjoying talking about what had just happened a little bit more than sort of the teeing you up and setting up. So we're going to do that on Tuesday. You can look for that right here on this feed. All right, let's get to it. This is Hat Trick. Okay, topic 1 this week. It has been a long off season so far for the NHL, especially if you're Oilers fans. We haven't seen hockey as Oiler fans all the way back since we were swept by the Winnipeg Jets. But it has been a busy off season, and we thought as we start to wind down August and prepare for preseason and all of the festivities that lead towards the NHL season, we wanted to talk a little bit about the off season. So we've had some time for the dust to settle. Not a lot of movement after the original flurry, a late draft and a late start to free agency at the end of July. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this down into a little hat trick of topics for the next 3 weeks. And each week we're going to talk about one part of the Oilers off season. So this week we are going to focus on the forwards, the front half of the lineup, moves, signings, trades, and all of that, what the team's shaping up to look like going into the off season, and just what our thoughts are on that. We've had some time to digest it. So let's get right to it. Elliot, after everything that we saw this offseason, players coming in, players going out, obviously a lot of the focus was on the defense, which we will talk about next week. But there has been some upgrades and some changes, whether you call them upgrades or not, but some personnel changes on the front end, obviously the biggest one being Zach Hyman. What are your thoughts and initial feelings so far as you've had some time to think about the Oilers offseason from the forwards perspective?
Yeah, I mean, they had a big job to do in the forwards. Heading into this year, you have to remember Ryan Nugent-Hopkins was an unrestricted free agent. There was clearly calls for a need for a deeper bottom 6. And ultimately the big one, which you mentioned in Zach Hyman, was filled around a scoring winger for Connor McDavid. I think if you're the individual that's going to go into the hockey season next year as an Edmonton Oilers fan with high hopes, you're pointing at the moves that were made at the front end this year. They are a much better team in their forward group. They're a much deeper team, arguably one of the deepest teams that we've ever seen as Oilers fans, just given how old we are. And so as a fan, my early impressions are you have to be pleased about this. This is a very exciting group and is the forward group to complement Leon and Connor that I think we've we're hoping for coming out of a disappointing end to last season.
Braden?
Yeah, I'm with Elliot. The hype around the forward group in the off season here. I think Ken Holland's done a great job in building especially around the holes that we were severely lacking. Yes, Hyman's a great addition to that top line. Nuge, I think, was the best signing, but Warren Fogle and Derek Ryan as an addition on the bottom end, both guys who can score at a clip on a 5-on-5. It's nice to see that there's going to be a little bit of room here for opportunities for the young guys. Ryan McLeod had a great kind of end to the season last year. There's going to be some room for Tyler Benson and Cooper Marotti to try to make the team. Not sure if they're going to necessarily make the starting day roster. But I do think that we've got a really great punch going into the next season here.
Yeah, I think I would agree with both of you that there's some positives there. I think it's always hard to judge all of these until we start seeing some of these guys out there. There's always the game of, I think we always try to see the rosy side of any of these deals because it's hard sometimes to look at that. I think the hard thing for the Oilers offensively in the last couple years has been that they have had these two absolutely insanely talented guys leading them in Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, back-to-back Hart Trophy winners on your team. Any team that has that kind of firepower up front is always going to struggle to find the right pieces to surround them with because any player next to them is going to look much worse than they would on a lot of other teams, right? You're comparing them to such high levels. Yeah. When you think about and you look at the statistics of a guy like Zach Hyman, Zach Hyman, would still be fourth on the Oilers team had he played for them last year from a forward perspective in points. Nugent Hopkins had more points than Zach Hyman did with the Maple Leafs. So he fits in a place where he's still really, really valuable for this team's in its top six. So that's an upgrade for sure. Warren Fogle, I agree, Braden. He has some upside for sure, but he's also one of those players who I think has a much higher ceiling than he's yet achieved. He's young. He's 25. There's space there. He had 20 points last year, and that's nothing to scoff at for sure. But the player that I'm really happy to see that we spent a little bit of money, even if it perhaps was a slight overpay, is a guy like Derek Ryan. And Derek Ryan, I think, adds something this team has lacked in the past, which is abilities to win faceoffs and really be a shutdown centerman on a fourth line. We haven't had that. We've been asking Nugent Hopkins to do it. We tried to turn Jujhar Khaira into that in the past couple of years, but he just wasn't that kind of guy. Derek Ryan has shown when he played in Calgary and last year in Carolina that he can play the difficult minutes on the penalty kill, and he's a versatile and sort of one of those unique players who has the ability to be offensive in the right situation, but his first priority is always going to be making sure that he's sound defensively. And I think that for me is the most important signing that they made from the forward perspective. All the other shiny pieces of Hyman and all that, that's great. We needed that, very important. Totally. But you also have to make sure that the bottom half of your lineup could do its job.
So I got a quick question here. There's, and we're not quite at the point where we're projecting what lineups look like, but is Nugent Hopkins better served as a center on a third line, or is he better served on that wing running up and down on the first and second line?
Elliot?
Well, I think that's sort of the beauty of Ryan Nugent Hopkins is that he's good in both spots.
For sure.
I think that there is a dream. There was such success, not last year, the year previous with Leon Draisaitl, Nuge and Yamamoto. And I think if you could get that line going again in the second line capacity as like a real second line scoring unit, and the Oilers have the depth to support that now, which I think is important. That's probably where I would ideally have him. I think that what you're doing is looking into the crystal ball, Bray, and you're thinking about 2, 3, 4 years down the road, maybe not 2, 3, 4 years down the road, that's the player that Ryan Nugent Hopkins transitions to, that third line defensive minded center with, some capacity to score. But I think right now, based on what he's being paid, I think he's a second line player. He needs to be a second line player for the Oilers to do what they need to do, right?
Yeah, and I think the other piece of it, Braden, is depth. We just don't have that guy who's going to fill that spot right now. And the tricky part is...
You're talking on the wing?
both places, and that's what's tricky about it. I appreciate why that's a conundrum, because what else do you have? You've got Kyle Turris or Derek Ryan on the third line currently. Or
Ryan
you have
McLeod.
one of these young guys coming up. And McLeod did play very well in the little period of time we got there near the end of the season. And I do think that, he will definitely get a shot to crack the opening day roster for sure. I think that both Holland and Tippett were very impressed with him. And, until he proves them otherwise, he's shown that he at least can stick with the NHL pace. Can he do that over 82 games? We're going to find out. None of these guys played 82 games last year, so we'll see. The other, not question mark, because I think we all know the deal is going to get done, but the other, the only sort of missing piece of business to be attended to is Kyler Yamamoto is still without a contract. He's still an RFA. So they're still negotiating and finishing out what that deal is going to look like. I would assume it'll be sort of a bridge deal to get him through, but he needs to bounce back too, because he had such an amazing 2020 prior to the stoppage. And last year, I think he just didn't quite get back to that same performance. And if he can be a top 6 guy, then the Edmonton Oilers really are going to be able to compete all year long, and push to be a top of the division at least.
Well, it's interesting you say that too, because it's going to be really important to see the progression pool part he has as well. He came back after being in Europe, and everyone was kind of like, okay, well, whatever we get. If he's shitty, then we're used to it. But if if he can step it up, that'd be great. And I think he's going into a contract year this next year as well, so it's going to be really important for that progression.
The coaching staff have a lot of options. That's what's cool this year. I really like what's going on with the Oilers this year on the front end.
So I think that's what we'll have to wait and see what the preseason gives us. Like Elliot said, there's options, and there's also some interesting storylines, even as far as some of these young guys coming up. I don't think we're going to see Dylan Holloway in the starting day roster, but what does he have to offer at preseason and to push some guys? And obviously Tyler Benson, I think we're getting close to that transition period where it's like, all right, Tyler Benson, you're going to be an NHL player, or are you not? Because the potential has been
Oilers
there,
not.
Yeah, exactly. And to see what's there for him, so we shall see. Next week we will talk about the defense, but for now we will leave it there. That was topic 1. Hey, guess what? The Ordinary Podcasting Network has a brand new show. If you're a fan of Hat Trick Sports, then I promise you are going to enjoy the Backyard Basketball Podcast. Braden Delacoldman, who is one of the hosts of this show here, Hat Trick, hosts an amazing basketball show with one of his best friends, Christian Steck. Together, the two of them will break down the NBA, news from around the basketball world, and get you caught up on everything you need to know. It's fun, it's fast, they have great conversation and banter, they love basketball, and you will love the Backyard Basketball Podcast. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts, and you can also follow them on Instagram at backyardbasketball_podcast. All right, topic 2. This one's just fun, and very rarely in the NHL nowadays do we see offer sheets, but when we do, it's always entertaining, especially as Oiler fans, if we all remember back to Kevin Lowe offer sheeting Dustin Penner and annoying the hell out of Brian Burke. But we just have some good old-fashioned Twitter trolling that's become part of this story, and just a lot of fun. So here's the background of this one before we get into it. The Carolina Hurricanes offer sheeted Jesperi Kotkaniemi from the Montreal Canadiens yesterday. They offered him a 1-year, $6.1 million offer sheet. Now, for those uninitiated in the NHL's salary cap era of contracts, when you have an RFA or a restricted free agent, they have exclusive negotiating rights with their team up until the point that free agency opens, at which point any other team can offer them a contract. And in doing so, they set up a transaction where if the player accepts that offer and the current team that owns that player chooses not to match it, the team that is taking the player owes the team that the player came from some form of compensation. The higher the salary amount, the greater the compensation. This seems like, oh, well, this must happen very often. It doesn't. There's sort of a gentleman's code that's been set up here in the NHL because general managers are very old-fashioned conservative people and they don't like to be screwed over, and it's a small fraternity. However, this has a history. So the Carolina Hurricanes have a player named Sebastian Aho, who in 2019 was offer sheeted by Montreal. So Montreal offer sheeted Sebastian Aho back then, and now as retribution, apparently, the Canes, who obviously want the player, have offer sheeted him. When I say it's retribution, it's because the tweet that announced that this happened from Carolina was in French and was the exact word-for-word quote of what Marc Bergevin had said at the time. He offer sheeted Sebastian Aho, saying Sebastian Aho accepted a deal to come to Montreal. He's very excited about the opportunity with this organization, blah, 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 blah. And the Hurricanes basically wrote the exact same thing in their tweet in French as a little bit of a stab. And then on Twitter followed it up with a change direction card from Uno and a tweet that simply said LOL. They are clearly having fun with this whole situation. The big question mark is, will Montreal match this deal? Should Montreal match this deal? Is this deal absolutely ridiculous for the price tag for Kotkaniemi, or is it worth it? And just overall, we don't get a lot of this kind of fun and excitement drama-wise on social media from the NHL, at least not very often. So it's been certainly fun to watch. Elliot, what were your thoughts, or what are your thoughts as you saw this whole thing unfold? And what do you think? Where are we going with this? Is this going to become a common occurrence?
Well, no, that's for sure. Definitely not going to be a common occurrence, and it's not a common occurrence in the NHL, and you understand exactly why. Because you piss off the other team, and they might come back and offer sheet one of your really young stars or someone that they want to access in years down the road. It's one of those things that it seems general managers don't seem to forget about. Let's not also forget that this also caught. If you match the offer sheet of a team that's trying to get your guy, that guy has to come back and play for your team after having signed a deal with another team. And we've seen a number of examples where that's caused friction and issues. I think about Shea Weber. Aho himself in Carolina is a good example. Shea Weber back in the day is another example. End up being traded out of there after being offer sheeted, signing somewhere else, and then having to come back. Yeah, it's this is why it doesn't happen very often, because it causes tumult in a league that really does not like this kind of tumult. Yeah. Look, this for me solidifies in my mind why I love the Carolina Hurricanes and why they are quickly moving up this rankings in terms of one of my favorite teams in the NHL after the Edmonton Oilers, and particularly their owner Thomas Dundon, who has really done a remarkable job of marketing his team both in the league, but also, in a really difficult market as something that's interesting and fun to watch. He's sort of like becoming, someone described it as the Jerry Jones of hockey. And you're either going to love him or you hate him. And the old NHL guys, they hate him. They hate the stuff that the Carolina Hurricanes were doing at the end of the games. They hate the Twitter stuff that would come out of this. But if you're someone like Jordan and myself, who I know love this kind of stuff, this only endears the team and him to us more. And I think that it's exactly the kind of new blood and fresh, fun stuff that can heat up rivalries, heat up leagues, and make things interesting. There's a bunch of other stuff. There's a $20 signing bonus as part of this deal, which references Christian Aho's 20, his player number, and a 15, which is Yasperi's number. Anyway, I don't have a really good point to make here, but I love it. I'm one of those people that believes that this is the kind of stuff that's good for hockey. It's good for hockey south of the border. But I'm also glad, I don't think our friend Jamie Henry is probably loving this move today. Let's just say that. I'm absolutely with you. I think it's so much fun for the culture of hockey and the fandom. I think that's something that the NHL lacks, is that kind of excitement. Off-season is so much fun to begin with. In terms of a hockey business move, I do not see the value being equivalent to a first and a third for Jesperi Kotkaniemi. Now, and also
it's 6.1?
6.1 and a 1-year deal. So you're giving up this is a rental. Unless they think they can re-sign him. I mean, that's well,
I've got theories on this. I can circle back on that.
So here's my theory, though. I think that Montreal might do something even further with this, and I think Jack Eichel is involved. I think that's all I'm going to say on that. I think that Jack Eichel might be on his way to Montreal, And I think Kotkaniemi might be a guy who ends up going to Buffalo and Buffalo signs him. And that's Bergevin's way of saying, screw you.
So what you're suggesting is that Montreal will match the deal and then trade him at a 6.1 cap hit?
I think that, well, can they trade him with the offer on the table?
Well, they could trade him with the offer on the table, but the offer still stands. So then, then Buffalo would be put in a position. That's right. Buffalo would have to match it.
But they've got a first and a third now to deal for Jack Eichel's rights.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true.
If they
don't match, right?
That's right.
So what you're telling me is that Bergevin actually might be orchestrating this whole thing?
I think Bergevin might consider all of the options in this deal, and I think Bergevin.
I think you're giving Mark Bergevin way too much credit. It's like suggesting that he knew Seattle would never touch Carey Price, so he exposed him to protect somebody else.
And did Seattle take him? And did Seattle take Carey Price?
No.
And did Montreal Canadiens
they
get to
didn't
the
call
finals?
his bluff. They didn't call his bluff. Here's the thing that I want to say about this whole thing. Elliot's absolutely right. I do love it. I think it's absolutely hilarious. And I'm enjoying every minute of it on Twitter, which is what it is. Yes, is it very gimmicky?
Totally.
100%. I think the only thing I disagree with Elliot on is this. I think Elliot has got the wrong owner general manager combo, or the wrong owner analogy in Jerry Jones. Yes, Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys is a very large personality, but Dundon, who is also from Dallas, is actually more like a different Dallas owner, and it's Mark Cuban. He is NHL's Mark Cuban. It is about him. He loves this brand. He's enjoying being a part of the brand. We don't see that very often in the NHL, and that's part of what's fun about it. You're absolutely right, Elliot. You know, they've embraced the heel role, to steal a wrestling term. They like to be, well, literally. I mean, Don Cherry, in one of his final, salvos across, the airwaves in Canada, was calling the celebrations they were doing post victories. He called the team a bunch of jerks, and they are literally selling merchandise to this day under the slogan "bunch of jerks." They are embracing the heel role. They like being the bad guys. This is a hockey move, but they're very much aware of how they can manipulate and use their social media platforms. And we're seeing that more and more in the NHL. To give a lot of teams credit, the Seattle Kraken have already come into the league with some good social media game. They're having some fun on Twitter. Vegas is absolutely amazing at this. They love to do this. The early games in their inaugural season, where it was like, hey, we're undefeated, all time, and things like that, was so much fun.
Did the Oilers have a Twitter account?
I don't know. They're certainly not very exciting and interesting. Incredibly conservative about how they do it. But think about Gritty and how you have literally a cultural phenomenon occurring in terms the overall the NHL branding. And as the NHL moves into ESPN, and we're going to talk about ESPN in the next topic, but as they move into this new marketing deal and the way in which they want to grow the game in the United States, I think this is a great example of how even an actual business transaction, hockey move that from a general manager's perspective is nothing to joke about. This is a serious decision they made. They are putting a lot on the line, giving up those picks and putting this amount of money on a young player like Kotkaniemi, who, look, I don't know if he's worth $6.1 million today, but that's a big bet on a very talented young guy who might one day get there. But as much as it's a serious business deal, they are also, as an organization, flexible enough to find the way to sort of exploit it and turn it into a moment. And look, they've owned the news cycle NHL wise for the last 24 hours, and that's exactly what you want if you're in a small market.
And went after the big bad Montreal Canadiens, who are getting a lot of bad press about some other stuff too. So there's that. Hey, just a quick thought: it's a 1-year deal. He's still a restricted free agent after this year. They have to qualify him at $6.1 million. That's so right. It's a big. It was a big decision.
They clearly believe in him. They wouldn't be doing this just for petty. Like no owner or general manager is going to just sign off on this as a revenge tactic. They do believe in it. They just find an opportunity in it.
Here's why I think Eichel's involved. They lose Kotkaniemi. They've lost 2 of their main centers. They're going to be absolutely hooped if they don't go after something. All the other centers are gone. There's
Well, look, if they get that first and third, then they've certainly got something to turn it into. But I guess we'll wait and see.
I don't see how Kotkaniemi fits down the middle in Carolina, though. I don't see how that works. Aho, Trocheck, Stahl.
Oh, Stahl's old. You got to start planning for the future.
Third line, yeah, 6.1 third line.
Well, he's not going to play on the third line. They'll put him on the wing before they put him on the third line.
Yeah. Or
they'll move some of the other guys.
They're pretty packed up front. I mean, it'd be a great addition, but we shall see.
All right, that's topic 2. Do you or someone you know own a small business? Are you looking to grow or to reach new customers? Hey, why not let us help? Hattrick is looking for unique brands, businesses, and products to advertise on our show. You can find out how we can help spread the word about your business by contacting us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. All right, topic 3 this week. We're going to talk about ESPN, sort of the fall of the mighty, the great network that once was. And, after controversy, they have found themselves again embroiled in one. This one surrounding Rachel Nichols and The Jump. So Rachel Nichols, who has hosted The Jump since, I believe, 2016, has been removed from on-air content on the network, and the show The Jump has been canceled. This follows a report that came out in the New York Times on July 4th, detailing critical comments she made about a fellow ESPN host, Maria Taylor. So Nichols, who is white, made the comments last year when she learned that Maria Taylor, who is black, would lead ESPN's NBA Finals coverage after the network had already announced in a news release in October of 2019 that Nichols would be the host. So ESPN had changed their minds, and Maria Taylor, who was an up-and-coming star at the network, was going to take over the finals coverage. In a phone conversation that was accidentally recorded by an ESPN server without Nichols' knowledge and obtained by the New York Times through an informant or a source, Nichols said, and I quote, "I wish Maria Taylor all the success in the world. She covers football. She covers basketball. If you need to give her more things to do because you are feeling pressure about your crappy long-time record on diversity, which, by the way, I know personally from the female side of it, like, go for it. Just find it somewhere else. You're not going to find it from me or taking my thing away." The Times reported that both the show's crew and several people inside the network were very upset when they heard this information. Nichols apologized while hosting The Jump on July 5th. And it also, I think, should be noted that ESPN was made aware of this information as far back, they believe, as January, February of that year. So ESPN had been sitting on this information. It was leaked to the New York Times. The report came out. Rachel Nichols was basically just given a slap on the wrist, left on the show. She apologized, sort of had her public flogging, and moved on. All right, I'm going to go to Elliot first on this one. Elliot, what were your thoughts when you first heard this story this week that The Jump had been canceled, that Rachel Nichols had been removed, and just sort of ESPN in general as this whole debacle has continued? Thoughts?
You're going to me first on this one, eh? So I think that there's too much to unpack and I want to be respectful of your guys' time. Let's focus on ESPN and how they acted. Okay. There's this fundamental rule in crisis communications that is, whatever you're going to do in response to a crisis, do it as quickly as possible, as thoroughly as possible, and provide as much as information as possible when you do it. And given that ESPN is a news organization, they should know this 10. This is simple sort of stuff. So that they have allowed this to drag on for as long as it has is incomprehensible to me. It's either you stand by the individual and the fact that they took ownership over their words and, promised to do better and apologized and moved on. And you make that decision as an organization, or you remove that individual. But you can't sort of just live in limbo and hope things will just disappear. It just does not work that way. The world does not work that way, particularly in these things now. And that they are being criticized to that point that their reaction was that now they're going to get rid of her. It's like just literally the worst way to do it. It's the worst way to do it for the organization. It's the worst way to do it for all the individuals involved. By the way, this is deeply embarrassing for both women involved in this story and incredibly frustrating. And so I can only imagine how frustrating it is for them. And like you said, it opened up to a lawsuit. Like everything about the way in which they went about this was wrong. And I think it speaks to a larger issue in that everyone, it seems like ESPN in this situation and lots of sports franchises right now don't know how to handle these issues, and they're constantly reactive. They're not proactive. And they're not proactive because they don't have race-based or gender-based policies to guide their organizations. And so they think they can just do things and maybe this is enough to get us by and this won't be an issue. And that's not a policy. And that's not creating change. That's not instituting something that's going to make a difference in society that you claim you want to be doing. And so the way that they react was so unprofessional and so improper from a public relations standpoint. But to me, all it says is these organizations and sports in general and ESPN in this case do not take these issues seriously and do not have proper policies in place. I could go and say a lot more, but I'll just end there.
Braden?
Yeah, I mean, what it makes me think of is how Bill Simmons ended up leaving, and that organization, ESPN, was not behind him in his, calling out, or how did he put it? Goodell lacking testicular fortitude, or however he put it, but essentially saying that there is a problem in sport, namely the NFL, and you've got a player here who is accused of domestic violence, and he's still in the league. And if I'm not allowed to report on that, or I'm not allowed to speak to that, because the organization is paying $2 billion for this, then what are we here to do? What is the organization for? And I think that's a huge problem. And now that ESPN's owned by Disney, there's even more of these are the rules. We can't have Paul Pierce smoking weed and sitting at a poker table, because this is not the values of this organization, and therefore this person who is a very valuable asset to that organization, to the NBA culture, to sport, isn't welcome here. And I think I think it's a shame. I think it's a shame with Rachel Nichols and how that situation ended up kind of unfolding, because this is somebody who has been a really integral part to that organization and to the NBA as a whole, for a great many years, and to be kind of in this situation now. You're right, Jordan. She was wrong in what she had said, and she owned that. She took responsibility for that on air, on live air, and yet out she goes.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things, like I mentioned off the top. I think there are a couple things to unpack here with her situation specifically. Let's deal with the Maria Taylor part in a second, but with the Rachel Nichols situation, she's wrong for what she said. However, in the original context of the situation, she believed she was having a private conversation with a friend. Doesn't mean what she said was right. That doesn't justify what she said. But it does set up a precedent where now you have a difficult position for ESPN, where they are recognizing, number one, that they have caught someone saying something inappropriate who is an employee of them. They have to deal with that. But recognizing that if they deal with it, they are setting themselves up for a libel situation where they should not have been in a recording. She was unaware that she was being recorded. We're dealing with Bristol, Connecticut, where the server is housed, which is a two-party state, meaning that both parties have to be aware of and consent to being recorded for something to be admissible as evidence in court, meaning now she has illegally been recorded from the perspective of the law. So I think ESPN probably dragged their feet on this because they recognized that they were in a very tricky spot, right? They had evidence, quote unquote, of something that they knew to be wrong, but they were terrified from an organizational perspective of how to deal with it. That's wrong. That shows you the frailty of their own system. Like Elliot was saying, if you don't have a policy that's clearly laid out for this exact situation, then you've already failed. You failed before the situation even occurred. Yeah. And that's clearly what happened here. This sounds more to me like lawyers got involved into the ear of the people with the decision-making power and scared them enough to make them afraid of just not dealing with it. They buried it under the rug and they got caught. The second part of this, though, is the timing. So I'm not going to accuse anybody of any kind of malicious behavior. However, this information is held clearly at ESPN for almost 6 months. It comes out during the NBA final, an incredibly valuable asset for the organization as ESPN. It's reported by the New York Times. And the second piece of this is while the NBA finals are going on, and ESPN is doing this, they just happen to be in contract negotiations with Maria Taylor, who, by the way, left the network now for a rival because she's like, I'm not going to work for this organization anymore because clearly they didn't have my back. And I think she's in the absolute right to do that. She's recognized they clearly cared more about protecting Rachel Nichols or their own asses than being fair to what, to someone who clearly said something racist about her. So she leaves the organization. They lose her. Now they chose not to discipline Rachel Nichols more than a slap on the wrist and giving her sort of a trial by public opinion on Twitter, where they exposed her to having to go on her own show and apologize. They did take her off the sidelines during the NBA finals, but she still hosted the jump every day of the NBA finals from inside the arena's lobby. Very little, if any, consequences, again, other than sort of the public, flogging on Twitter. But there's no reprimand. There's nothing else at that point. And now 2 months later, all of a sudden she's being pulled from the job. If you're going to take her off the air, take her off the fucking air when the problem exists. Don't drag your feet again. Because now you've lost both of these incredibly talented women from your organization. One of whom, yes, did something wrong. But if she did something wrong enough to be fired now, wasn't it also wrong enough to be fired back then? You know what I'm saying?
Well,
at some point you get yourself into this quagmire.
Well, I completely agree with you. And there's a very simple way to deal with this. It sounds like Rachel Nichols is like I don't follow NBA, as we jokingly note every episode, it seems. But it seems like she was an institution in this organization and had actually a bit of a trailblazer for women in the sport as well, too, and owned some of that as well. And had a willingness at the time in which this broke to take responsibility for it, as you said, on her own show. So, yes, nothing more than a slap on the wrist. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, but certainly more could have been done and more should have been done. And they could have worked together with her on that. I'm going to take
but why wasn't it?
Well, exactly. But I'm just going to lay out what it could look like. I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm going to apologize for it. I'm going to have a personal conversation with the other individual involved. I'm going to take some sensitivity training. I'm going to learn from this. That's how you own something. That's how you have a real conversation. I'm going to work to be better. Because as I've said on other podcasts, and I'll say here, I believe in second chances. People can make mistakes, but it's what you do. It's what you do as that reciprocity piece, what you're thinking about and rectify it. Exactly. So clearly not enough was done. And so the blowback came back again, and it got thrown back in their face.
And
this is what I mean about setting up systems.
But why was more not done in the moment, Elliot? Not what should have been done.
Oh, I know.
You're absolutely right about.
Exactly.
The reason is very simple. It's money. The NBA has this huge deal with ESPN and the NBA. It's the bloody finals. They just didn't want to upstage their own show.
Rachel Nichols,
and the reality is they were already being upstaged. They just aren't. They're so short-sighted to recognize that they were in a shitstorm and they couldn't get out of it. And that's part of the problem with ESPN is that we've now seen. Braden brought up Bill Simmons, but Jamel Hill is the same thing. When ESPN gets into these situations that step just a little bit outside of sports, I should say. It's not just basketball. It seems to be basketball a lot with ESPN because that's their biggest brand outside of the NFL. But they continually put themselves in this situation by not, like Elliot said, not having a clear policy or constantly trying to sort of weasel their way out of these situations. And it only ever gets worse for them. But they've strayed so far from the almighty brand of what ESPN was in the early aughts as the go-to sports thing, built on the back of SportsCenter, built on the back of amazing sports coverage. They developed talk shows. They developed, think pieces. They had 30 for 30 documentary channels. What is ESPN today? Nothing but sports coverage. Why? Because they've recognized that in the era of Twitter and social media, they are not competing with the highlight shows anymore. People can go to Twitter and do all these things, but they've completely lost what their identity is. And in doing so, I think they've become so scared to lose even that fraction of a market they have, that they are making absolutely terrible corporate decisions, and they constantly put themselves in these situations where they're just shooting themselves.
But don't you think they're more arrogant than that? Don't you think that this actually comes down to a bunch of executives who just think that we're untouchable on this?
Of course.
Absolutely. Why is really Stephen A. their main man? He's just as arrogant.
That's when you live in a world where he can consistently get away with things. I don't mean to drag this on because but it's certainly there's something that's about money, Jordan, for sure. But I think a lot of it's about arrogance. I think.
Well, I think as an organization, all ESPN right now is an ad revenue generator. That's all they do. That's their entire business model. I mean, literally, their halftime show, Elliot, is 2 minutes long.
Yeah,
it used to be 9. It used to be 10. It used to be 16 minutes long for the NBA. They used to actually have content. Right? They've completely abandoned Countdown. They do not care about what these shows look like other than making sure that they are ad revenue generators, and all they are doing is putting live content on. Look what they've done. They just literally signed a deal with the NHL, completely overpaid for what the deal was with the NHL, so that they can continue to have the most live sports available, because they recognize that that is the only thing that they can sell nowadays.
Well, they got UFC
sell
too.
These other shows. They've got the UFC. They've got the NHL. They fought to get the bloody FIFA World Cup away from NBC. They'll probably try to go get it's just such a mess. They're losing so much money too, that I think that you're right, Elliot. They just don't know they just panic. They seem to continually panic. And it's kind of sad to watch. It's such an established brand, and we all grew up watching and knowing, Berman and all of just what the brand was. And I think it's sad to see something so big sort of fall apart. And this is just another example of that. And we'll see where it goes, with Amazon getting an NFL deal and the future of sports going to these other platforms. We're going to find out. So, well, that was fun. We got a little heated there. Who doesn't love that? We've wrapped this one up. As we mentioned, we're going to be back next week talking about the defense of the Edmonton Oilers, and I know Elliot is hot and bothered under his tank top collar about it.
I don't think it's just Elliot out there in the Oilers fandom.
Exactly. So you can all look forward to that. We'll be back next Sunday to talk.
I can't wait
to talk Oilers defense. And as I mentioned off the top, please go check out the Backyard Basketball Podcast. It's really, really good. It's long-form basketball talk. If you enjoy basketball, NBA, Braden and Christian break it down, and they have a great repartee, and they have a great banter, and they really, they know their stuff, but more than anything for me, it's like sitting in on and listening to two guys who just love basketball, talk basketball. It's awesome.
It's love to see basketball hosts that aren't racist.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, there you go.
And we also have the Pit Stop Podcast coming to you. This will come out Monday, so we will have that tomorrow on Tuesday. So look forward to that. Lots of content this week. Thank you, Elliot. Thank you, Braden. Both of you contributing an ample amount of content yourselves. Have a good week, both of you, and thank you all for listening. That was Hat Trick. Hat Trick is a member of the Ordinary Podcasting Network. It's produced every week by Jordan Dowler-Coltman and Braden Dowler-Coltman. And follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening. At one point, ESPN was so full of themselves, and they tried to launch a phone. Look that shit up.
You just call in and they just tell you about sports?
No. It was a piece of hardware, Braden, like an iPhone. In 2004, 2005, when every freaking company was coming out with their own phone, they had an ESPN phone.
The Ordinary Podcasting Network wishes to acknowledge that the lands on which our conversations take place include Treaty 6 territory, the traditional meeting ground and home for many indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, and the Nakota Sioux peoples, as well as the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. And we extend our appreciation for the opportunity to live, create, and share stories on these territories.
The Ordinary Podcasting Network intends to engage in conversations and dialogue which acknowledge that reconciliation is not a destination, but a journey, and that we remain committed to practicing our craft in a decolonized space.